We're going to listen to the international best-selling author of The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. I'd like for this best-selling author to give us her name and then give me a basic overview. What is this important book all about? Good morning.
Good morning. This is Isabel Wilkerson, and I'm the author of The Warmth of Other Suns. And this book is essentially the story of the biggest underreported story of the 20th century, which was the outpouring of African Americans for most of the 20th century from the South to the North, and the effect that it had on the entire country, both South and North. And in some ways, there's a universal story of fortitude and faith and courage of people who made the tough decision to leave a caste system which had gripped them in the South, and ultimately made a decision to leave, a very hard decision to leave, and it had an effect on those who left and on those who stayed and on all Americans, really.
If I was to go to the Webster Dictionary and look up the word thorough, I would see your picture because it seems like you did a lot of thorough research by researching, 1,200 persons at least?
I worked on this book for over 15 years, so that if it were a human being, it would be in high school and dating. That's how much time I spent on this book. And I interviewed over 1,200 people to narrow it down to 3 amazing individuals, each of whom represents one of the 3 major streams of this migration. The one stream was up the East Coast, which involved people who left Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, North and South Carolina, and Virginia, up to Washington, D.C., and to Philadelphia, and to New York. This was the stream that they took, and they were following the railroads and the bus routes that took them out of the areas where they were gripped by the caste system there. And also there was the Midwest stream, which took people from Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee and Arkansas to Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit, and the entire Midwest. And then there was a final stream, which took people from Louisiana and Texas to California and really the entire West Coast.
Well, let's start there. Tell me about the story of this young doctor who did go that last path that you did from Louisiana to California.
Yes, Dr. Robert Joseph Pershing Foster. He had been a surgeon in the Army during the Korean conflicts. This was the 1950s. So not that long ago, really, if you think about it. And when he got out of the Army, it turned out that he could not practice surgery in his own hometown of Monroe, Louisiana. And so he decided to set out on a course, a much more perilous journey than he had anticipated. He was going to drive the way. He was going to drive first and then send for his family later. He found that the bounds of Jim Crow went beyond the boundaries that he had thought that it might, and so he ended up finding out that he could not find a room, a hotel room, a motel room to rest for the great length of the journey. So he had to drive without sleep until he got to the coast. And he had not anticipated this. And this is something that I attempted to recreate myself with my parents in the car. I rented a Buick as he had, and I came to that part of the journey where the road gets mean. You're in the desert, and you're in the mountains, and there are hairpin curves everywhere, and you've gone without sleep, because I followed his directions as to what he had experienced. He said, this thing I've gone over 3,000 times. He was still worrying over this experience, even in older age. And at a certain point, I had my parents in the car, and they were getting nervous for us all because it was dangerous. And they said, please stop the car. And if you won't stop the car, let us out, because we've been through this before. They had lived through Jim Crow, and they did not really want to have to go through that again. And so we actually were not able to recreate to the letter what he had experienced, because we had no trouble finding a place to stay, because it was no longer 1953. But this is what the people had to go through in order to, in some ways, escape a caste system. It was in some ways a seeking of political asylum, a defection in some ways from this caste system that they had been under.
Why did you choose to include in your narrative a personal story? Because I love the photographs of your mother at Howard University, because, being from Washington, D.C., you think about the wall on First Street where everybody used to hang out. But why did you include the personal story of your own life?
Well, I wanted to include it because it was in fact my parents' migration that inspired me. I had grown up the child of people who had migrated as part of this great movement. None of the people actually thought of themselves as being part of a great movement. They merely made a decision that was best for them under the circumstances, and you can realize in some ways the effect of the individual decision that one person makes, and you multiply that times millions, and you have a movement on your hands. But I grew up as the daughter of a mother who had migrated from Georgia, Rome, Georgia, to Washington, D.C., where she met a man who had migrated from Southern Virginia, from Petersburg, Virginia. They would never have met had there been no Great Migration, so I wouldn't even exist, and neither would many, many African Americans in the North, the Midwest, and the West, or Americans in general, because most Americans are products of multiple lineages, people coming from Ireland, meet someone from Italy, and there you have a whole new lineage in this country. So I grew up with that experience, but really didn't realize the magnitude of it because it was just I was surrounded by people whose parents were from North Carolina, parents from South Carolina, parents from Georgia. I was surrounded by that in Washington, D.C. And the realization of the impact of this migration made me want to go back and understand where did we come from and how did we get here and what was the cost? What did it take for us to get to the point where we were? And so I wanted to include my own family story in this, but as a journalist, I didn't want it to be about my family because I wanted people to realize how large this was. One thing I want to make mention of, since you've asked that, is that the things that are in the book related to my own family story, I had no idea growing up. In other words, my mother and father did not talk about their experiences in the South. In fact, that's one of the reasons the story hasn't been told, because people did not talk about it. When they left, they turned their backs and often did not look back. They took things with them. They took the food, the music, the language, the memories, and the love that they had for the people that were still there, but they did not tell their children and grandchildren about it, and they often didn't share with them a lot of the beauty of the Southern experience too. So they sort of left everything, and so I didn't know, and everything that's in the book that relates to my own family. In fact, the photographs I had not, with the exception of one photograph, I had not seen many of the photographs that you see there. Those I received from a cousin who had grown up in Georgia, and so that was how that was included.
In our remaining 1 minute, the name of the book is entitled The Warmth of Other Suns, The Epic Story of America's Great Migration. Give me a closing comment. Tell me how you get a copy of the book. Let me know how to stay in contact with you. And why did you decide to read this book, every word, to your mother before you go?
Long question. It can be purchased it's The Warmth of Other Suns. It can be purchased on Amazon. It can be purchased at almost any bookstore, Barnes & Noble, Borders, and all the major bookstores and independents as well. I decided to read it to my mother because she was in some ways the inspiration for the book itself, and it also jogged her memories. It connected her to this very big work that I was doing. It proved to her that I was producing something, and she is in some ways, and my father too, were the inspiration for this book, and they deserve to hear it. I have such tremendous gratitude for them, and I would hope that the book would inspire other people to hear their family stories before it's too late, and recognize that we owe a debt and a sense of gratitude to the people who made us who we are and the sacrifice that they made for us to be who we are.
Well, thank you so very much for sharing this important story. This will be heard over and over again at DrAlvin.com, the website, DrAlvin.com on Facebook, and eventually on YouTube at DrAlvin.com on YouTube. You have a great and wonderful day, and you be safe up there in the Big Apple, okay?
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Bye-bye.